Welcome to the Freebirth podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
Are you craving a community of like-minded women? Do you feel like an outsider in your family or your community? Well, I may have the place for you. We have a Freebirth Society private online community that's full of radical and wild women just like you. If you resonate with the topics that we explore on this podcast and want to belong in a circle of women who support each other in the self-exploration of free birth and wild mothering, come join us. You can apply online at our website, freebirthsociety.com. It's where myself and my team are hanging out these days, and we would love to get to know you. All right, friends, this is the episode you have been waiting for. I sit down this week with the smartest woman I know and one of my dearest friends, Yolande Clark. Today, we are diving into some of the cornerstones of the industrialized prenatal care model, the gestational diabetes test, the GBS test, ultrasound technology, and navigating RH factor. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited today. We are providing a long-awaited episode. We're going to be covering a couple different topics we're going to get into, and I have my darling Yolande Clark with us today.
Hey, I'm here.
She's here. And so I do just want to say at the top of this that we are going to be diving into gestational diabetes, GBS, ultrasound technology, and rogam, or RH negative. And so with that, I just want to say that we are not medical professionals. We are not giving medical advice. We are women with brains that hold opinions and some criticism that are offering some musings on these topics. So our entire platform and message is rooted in you holding your own agency to make your own decisions and think for yourself. So we fundamentally trust you to know what is best for you and your baby, and we are just here to offer some perspective. Anything you want to say, Yo?
It's true. Don't take our advice.
Yes, don't take
Just
our
have
advice.
thoughts.
Well, actually, we don't even have advice.
We have no advice. It's
We
not
have-
advice. I should not have said that.
It's
not
not.
advice.
And
It's
so
just random.
it's just
stuff.
random musings that happen to be life-changing for some people, myself included. So, with that, I just also want to plug that Yolande has completed an epic feat and has finished writing a life's work, really, a book that is going to be coming out at some point in the future. And so this is kind of an intention, too, to just give everyone who's new to her a little taste of her genius and what will be held in the book. This is just a little taste.
You're going to cut the genius part, right?
Nope. Everyone knows. I can say it, not you. Okay,
Yeah.
so with that, let's dive into. I want to start with gestational diabetes, and where do you want to kick off? If someone is, brand new to the concept that there could be anything other than a forced glucose test, and being assessed, and then having that completely determine whether they will be induced or not, or whether they'll be risked out or not. Where do we want to start?
Oh my goodness. So gestational diabetes doesn't exist. It's not a thing in my world. As far as I'm concerned, you either have diabetes or you don't. So, as a pregnant woman. So yes, while there are, a small number of women who probably who may become truly insulin resistant during pregnancy, those women tend to have the precursors to actual diabetes. So gestational diabetes is not anything.
It's not a
Um,
disease.
it's not a disease. So diabetes and gestational diabetes are different completely. So diabetes is not the same thing as the reality that, some women during pregnancy have slightly elevated blood sugar levels. This is normal. That's not harmful. It's completely normal for our bodies to, register higher blood sugar levels during pregnancy. This is by design. And then there are also some women who would probably do well to modify their diets a little bit during pregnancy in order to better manage their blood sugar. But again, it's not a disease. So the
Mhm.
whole rigmarole of fasting and drinking that horrifying toxic
Chemical,
drink,
yeah, ridden.
glucola, it's disgusting. That whole thing, that ritual, really, and it's a ritual of the industrial obstetric system. It's totally counterproductive, and it is really a a, an attempt to manufacture this disease
Mm,
that's called gestational diabetes, which is really just a set of symptoms.
right.
It's again not really a thing. So
It's not a disease.
it's not a disease. So what that term gestational diabetes does is it really serves to fabricate this entire population of women who are supposedly at risk,
Mhm.
right? So women whose bodies are pathologized for no reason other than for the benefit of the obstetric system that requires willing or subdued patients in order to really validate its existence.
Mhm.
And
We
this is
need we
not
need that
news.
on a T-shirt.
I mean, we know this, right?
Yeah.
But actually, fascinatingly, I have a quote. I want to look it up. It's really not news. So there's an obstetrics manual. Actually, I did make a note of this. Just give me one second. An obstetrics manual. Um, Obstetrics, mind you, right? So this is a medical manual, and it was published in 1989, I think. And there's this quote from the manual that reads, "Gestational diabetes is a diagnosis in search of a disease." So this is what
Mm,
doctors, obstetricians were saying in 1989. So it just kind of illustrates a little bit of
mhm.
how things have shifted backwards, really. And this concept of, this fabrication of symptoms to fit this disease model is really confirmed by obstetrician Michel Audin as well. I'm a huge fan of Audin's. He's one of the only male researchers or male
He
birth
is the only
expert.
male.
The only male birth expert that I'll even allow that term to be
Yeah.
used on him.
Birth expert.
But and the reason that I can tolerate him at all is because he's one of the only men that I'm aware of who's had anything to do with birth, who's actually come to the correct conclusion that men have no place at all in the birth room. So
Right.
I respect him for that. But anyway, Odell basically says that same thing, which is gestational diabetes is just a complete fabrication. Like the placenta's job is to elevate blood sugar. Like that's one of the things that it does. So again, it's totally normal for a pregnant woman's blood sugar to be elevated. But you know, the vast majority of women who do test positive for gestational diabetes, which again just means that our blood sugar reading would be at a certain arbitrary level according to these like dumb charts. And that's another thing too. The guidelines for what constitutes gestational
Mhm.
diabetes are constantly changing, right?
Mhm.
So I mean it's ridiculous. um, but anyone with even a cursory understanding of diabetes blood sugar issues should know that um, the optimal diet for lowering blood sugar is to focus on protein, reduce carbohydrates. So we don't want to eliminate carbs by any stretch, but we want to be selective about the kinds of carbohydrates that a pregnant woman might consume. And this is something that uh, you know, the treatment for most women who are diagnosed with this pretend fake disease of gestational diabetes is simply to modify their diet and to exercise more. So the entire structure of what
Mhm.
constitutes gestational diabetes in the obstetric system makes no sense at all, right? But that said, in the hospital system too, where I live anyway, most women who are diagnosed with this fake made up disease, GD, are still routinely told to consume a low fat, high carb diet, which couldn't be more wrong anyway.
That's so
And
weird.
yet it's so, so weird. So like none of it makes any sense. Just absolutely none of it makes any sense. And, you know,
Well, it does
yeah,
in keeping with, proving that women are broken and let's keep them down and let's medicalize their bodies. And, it makes perfect sense for what we know the agenda of the obstetrical model is.
exactly, exactly. And it is one of those, this is one of the aspects of the system that is just self-perpetuating, right? It just serves to validate its own existence. So, the fact that so many women consent to consuming this poisonous liquid in order to be diagnosed with this issue is just it's so crazy. So, I love my dear friend midwife Mary Lou Singleton's analogy. So she equates testing for gestational diabetes with giving pregnant women, the cigarette test. So, how can we really be sure that pregnant women don't tolerate cigarette smoke well? So, we could actually lock them in a broom closet for, a few hours and force them to smoke 16 cigarettes in a row. And if they come out coughing and choking and feeling like hell, then, obviously they have pregnancy nicotine disease,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's very, very similar, actually. It makes about as much sense.
And so the system is giving these women high sugar, toxic drinks and then testing to see how their body responded to that gross ass drink.
Yeah, and we're supposed to be really surprised when quite a lot of women don't respond very well,
Right.
and then they're pathologized. But there's really nothing we can do other than just tell them not to eat garbage and,
And I love I
probably they'll
love
be
I
okay.
love the alternative. I hear so many women say, "Oh, my doctor gave me an option. He had me eat a bag of jelly beans." Like
It's
it's
so
the same fucking
depressing.
thing.
So depressing. And even in the context of free birth too, I mean, that's our zone. We hear this all the time, like women who are planning to have these beautiful, organic, spontaneous pregnancies and births, but they're going to go and get the gestational diabetes test. Like it just doesn't compute for me at all. It makes absolutely no sense. So, you know, and again, I really want to emphasize this that there are women who truly do have issues with insulin resistance, which often means that they have diabetes, or
So
that
that
they will
yeah.
develop, diabetes at some point in the future. It's very rare, but this presents with symptoms too. I mean, it's not like a woman who actually does have latent diabetes is going to feel 100% great and totally fine, and then like it just these things don't occur out of nowhere,
Mhm.
so some of those symptoms include excessive thirst, excessive, like really excessive urination. I'm peeing all the time, but I'm confident I'm fine, and just feeling bad and headaches and issues like that, infections that persist. So the overall point is that within the system, if we stop overdiagnosing women, if we stop standardizing these treatments and diagnostics that women receive as though we're cattle, we might actually have more resources to actually respond to issues when they do come up, if they do come up. So, it just, to my mind, and this is what I've, talked about with so many women over the years, instead of going and having anything to do with that test, act as if you already have gestational diabetes, um, and just take care of yourself because that is the treatment 95% of the time. Eat real food, avoid junk, focus on getting ample protein, fresh foods. Don't limit your salt intake. It's very important during pregnancy. And, we go into much more detail on all of this in our course and in my book coming up and
Yeah, because
stuff
that's
like that.
that's a lot of women ask me when I do the Q&As on Instagram or I get emails of, I want to do my own care, but with my last pregnancy I had GD. And so what do I do with this pregnancy? Um and I mean you kind of just answered it, but I just wanted to kind of, bring that into this conversation because it's getting that test and being diagnosed either way is not the only option.
No, and for women who have had that experience and who want to then, have a free birth or a home birth or, a birth outside of the system, I would, in that situation, really be looking very deeply at what that diagnosis really meant and,
Mhm.
how did that actually affect my experience? And this is, we could talk about this for a lot longer, but another issue around the whole gestational diabetes thing is that women who are diagnosed with gestational diabetes, who then have babies who are, 10 pounds, 1 ounce, those babies are often automatically kept in the NICU
Of course.
because they're, at risk. And I mean, it's such a tragic outcome and it's so unnecessary. And again, it has to do with standardization of women's care and the pathologization of our bodies, really.
Well, and that's we were just talking about this yesterday, that we do these birth debriefs with women all the time, and how often I hear women say, I was induced with my previous birth because I had gestational diabetes, and my doctor told me if I wasn't induced, I would kill my baby. And
Mhm.
so it is an
Mhm.
impossible, that's an impossible thing to hear. And and I hope anyone hearing this who has had that experience knows that, of course you got the induction. You are not to blame for then having done the thing when they pulled the dead baby card, to prevent it. It's just,
Mhm.
we're here to offer the perspective that, perhaps, there's more to the story
Mhm.
than
Mhm.
just justifying induction, which only serves the system and that doctor.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on the mythical disease that's not a disease
Um,
of GD?
I don't know. It just gets
It's
it's
a lot. I mean,
tiring.
and like you said, we go way more into this in our course, obviously, and of course your book coming up. And I think, one of the wisest pieces, to take away of what you just said is act like you already have it. And the response to that is to eat correctly,
Mhm.
eat healthy as best as you can with high proteins and low carbs and lots of fresh, wonderful food, a salad every day if you have access to it. Obviously not eating boxes of donuts, every single day, as that won't serve, your sugar levels, right? It's
Mhm.
it's not, this isn't that complicated. Um, and this
And
is, and I love that in our course you open up the chapter with something like, um, gestational diabetes is one of the most, misogynistic procedures in the industrialized, system of birth. And I love it because it's so true, because it's so, infantilizing to act like we need to be tested for our blood sugars because we can't be, responsible for our own diets and for our own health.
mhm, mhm, definitely. And we're all so entrenched in the system that I think it's hard for individual women, and I've been through this myself too, to kind of to to individualize our own experiences. Like it's hard to sort of believe that it's actually possible to proceed through our pregnancies,
Hmm.
um, taking responsibility for ourselves, but also seeing our own experiences as individual ones, and
Mm.
and
In a
and
nut.
not to sort of funnel ourselves into those categories.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So that's just a little nutshell around GD. We have more of that in the course, but let's move on to the infamous GBS.
GBS. Oh my goodness, GBS is another racket.
Yeah.
And it's a racket for a number of reasons, but first of all, I really want to preface all this by saying that GBS disease in babies can be very, very serious. It can be fatal.
Hmm.
So it's really important to make a distinction between the racket that is GBS testing
Hmm.
and how GBS is treated and approached within the industrial system versus the very real and, sometimes tragic risks, albeit quite tiny, of GBS disease in infants itself. So, that's really what's at the core of these issues fundamentally is that there's very little relationship between those serious and scary and real risks of GBS disease in newborns and the manner in which women are coerced, quite frankly, and again, funneled into really counterproductive and harmful diagnostic approaches to the issue. So, for those who aren't aware, GBS stands for Group B streptococcus, and Group B strep is a bacteria that is actually present in the digestive systems of up to 40% of the population at a given time. So, it's basically a normal part of our physiology of our gut bacteria. And it's only really a potential problem if it becomes imbalanced. So if there's an overgrowth of this bacteria, and of course, we're really just starting to understand the role of bacteria in our bodies. But it's really very important to know that Group B strep is not inherently dangerous in and of itself. Um, so in North America,
And just to point out, of course it's not, because if at any given time a third to almost a half of us have it, of course it's not inherently dangerous, right? That wouldn't make
right?
logical sense.
It just doesn't. It's not. Um, However, that said, in North America, pretty much every single pregnant woman in the system, and even those without, outside of the system, talk about that in a minute, is effectively compelled to accept the GBS test. And I say effectively compelled because, of course, we're sold this rhetoric of informed consent. But what that tends to mean in practice is that women are informed of what we are expected to consent to, right?
Right. Big difference.
And then we're badgered and shamed and threatened until we consent.
And I'd like to
Right.
point out here that when a woman with a home birth midwife, a licensed home birth midwife, declines the GBS test, she's often met with, okay, but if we transfer for any reason, the hospital will have to then assume you have it. If we can't show up with a negative, right? So coercion to get the test because you're so
Mhm.
likely to transfer. And so if we show up with no test, you will be treated and your baby will be treated as a positive, and therefore you will have, prophylactic antibiotics and your baby will be observed in the NICU. So what is a woman going to say to that? Well, of course I'm going to take the test for the chance at a negative.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, if that's not, to my mind, that's criminal. It's not even. I don't understand how anyone can not see that as the. It's
Well,
just
I
disgusting.
think midwives think that they are being uh, protective of their clients to let them know. Well,
Oh my god,
hey,
it's so
if
much
you decline,
worse.
yeah,
Actually, it's so much worse when a midwife is backing that kind of approach because it's so manipulative and it's so abusive. It's truly abusive. I mean, this is gaslighting to an extreme degree, because midwifery is sold as
yeah, exactly.
woman-centered and just all of that nonsense. It's very unfortunate, and I feel for midwives in the system as well. There's lots of issues there,
Yeah, conversation for another
but
day.
no, it's
Okay,
it's it's
so
it's not
GBS.
good. Yeah. So yeah. Uh, So the test itself is hugely problematic. So it consists of a swab done to the vagina and anus, which is it's not something I could personally have done to me under any context. It's done at around 36, 38 weeks gestation. But what's interesting about the test, apart from how gross it um, is that interestingly, it's not even offered in many European countries, so that's highly indicative of the usefulness of it all, right? Um, but more importantly, the results of the test can change from one day to the next, and this again is because a large minority of human beings just have the bacteria in our systems, and believe it or not, our bodies are not machines. Our bodies are dynamic, changing organisms that respond to the environment in delicate and delicate and highly sensitive and calibrated ways. So a woman might have the GBS test um, register as positive on
Mhm.
Tuesday, and then on Thursday it's negative. So, at the core, the test itself is just kind of arbitrary and meaningless.
And
And
once you get a positive, you can't be retested in most places.
Or
So
they
you
decided that
you're yeah,
yeah.
you're once you're positive, you're positive. So if you get a positive at 36 weeks, it literally doesn't matter if you
to
do
to the obstetricians, to the people who
to
are
the
working in the system.
CNMs, yeah,
Yeah.
once a positive, then you're positive and will be treated as positive with GBS, even if you don't have it
Yeah.
at the time of your birth,
Yeah,
because there
exactly.
isn't a test yet, that you can get when you go into the hospital and have a turnaround time of an hour and find out, not that I'm advocating for that, but just there isn't a test that is relevant that exists that can be for in birth to have an accurate idea
Right.
if it's present or not.
Exactly. But I also think that women are not I think a lot of women don't understand that simply having a slight overgrowth of this bacteria in your system, it does not mean that
Right.
your baby will be affected.
Right.
And even babies who babies themselves who end up um, colonized by GBS, that doesn't then mean that your baby will become sick. So there's so many
Mhm.
layers to how risk is calculated in this case, right? That I think a lot of medical professionals don't actually understand as well. There's so much fear that goes into how these systems are created, um, and I think that fear gets compounded and compounded, and people don't really understand what the actual statistical risks are, which are very very small. Um, Also, this is really important too. There are no studies that can possibly be done in the context of women who
Right.
are giving birth outside the system. So we actually have no idea what the real risks are to women who are giving birth at home. My completely anecdotal, uneducated opinion is that the risks are far lower because we're in our own environment, because we don't have the burden of so many other um, just we're surrounded by disease. Our immune systems are far more protected in our own homes. So I think that that's important, and that's never factored into the conversation.
And not to mention that when babies are given the antibiotics, there's a shocking percentage of babies that are dying from the antibiotics.
I was just going to bring that up, and that's so so important. So
No
so
one's
first
told
of
that.
all, no one has ever told that because antibiotics are this panacea, right? So first of all, this is essential to understand. There are numerous studies that actually show that in most cases the antibiotics are not actually effective.
Mhm.
Okay, so they don't work. They
Mhm.
don't
It's
even
just like a
work.
ritual.
It's a ritual,
Yeah.
and then as you just said, there are actually very significant risks to subjecting our babies to these antibiotics as well. So the whole issue is really complicated, but also when you start to unravel these threads and kind of dig into these layers of propaganda, really, you
Mhm.
start to sort of realize that we're not really being told the truth about this whole thing.
And like
Um,
with so many things with industrialized birth, if it actually was a magical cure that was rendering amazing outcomes, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
yeah,
It isn't, and that it is not saving all these babies. And in fact, there are many studies that are showing it's harming babies, so
definitely, and it's used as a weapon
right.
against women to force women to comply, to shame us into complying with all
I
kinds of
heard
other
a
things
I
that
heard a
happen.
quote yesterday on a health podcast that the guy said Western medicine is really, really good at killing things, and that's where their genius lies. So antibiotics, he had like parasites in his brain from living in the Amazon for a while, and he had like holes in his front heart from some of the plant medicine he ingested, and so he was like, well, first I went to the Western medicine because they're really good at killing things. So I got everything killed, and then I rebuilt my body with plant medicine, and it really just struck me, and stuck with me was like, yes, Western medicine is really good at killing things, and there is a time and place for that. Parasites are a great example.
Mhm.
Severe infection where you could die, grateful. Yes, there's a time and
Mhm.
place for some of that. But to give every single woman this test to then justify antibiotics in labor every 4 hours for the entire process of labor, and then to continue, often antibiotics in the baby, or NICU observation is so fucking ludicrous.
It really is. It's just it's quite silly. I mean, I'm pregnant now. I have never been tested for it. It
Let's
wouldn't
give
even
you your
cross my
rectal
mind.
swab.
Yeah, thank you. But and it's in a similar sense to the issue of gestational diabetes. Um, it's not as though n- I'm very proactive. About my gut health in general. So, I do everything I can to maintain excellent, bacterial balance. And I also know how my birth process might impact on the risks of GBS to my newborn. And I know what to look for in my newborn in terms of signs of potential infection,
Right.
with
That's where I wanted to
GBS.
go
So
next. So
those are really important, right? And so we go into lots of detail about all that stuff in our course. So it's not as though, again, we're just dismissing the risks of these issues entirely at all. No, in fact, I am very confident at this point in my life that what I'm doing and what so many of the women that I've worked with are doing is probably objectively far more proactive, far safer, even possibly, than all of this nonsense that happens in hospitals and under the care of midwives who, themselves are, forced into really, um, delivering all of this nonsense. I think a lot of them know it's nonsense too, and
mhm,
it's just, yeah,
part of
it's
the
part of
game.
the system, part of the
So
game.
so just quickly to wrap up GBS then, if someone is having a wild pregnancy, uh, is there anything helpful? Not like we're not going to get into like how to have healthy gut flora in this episode. Like that's something in our course. You can learn about that in 1,000 different ways online. But is there anything we want to leave people with GBS around? Of course, worst case scenario, your baby is born, not yours, like objective baby is born with GBS and is has the disease of GBS in the newborn. What are some signs? What are some symptoms that someone could be alert to?
Honestly, it's pretty rare. I've never encountered it in my experience, but a baby that seems unwell um, should seek. A mother should seek medical attention if she feels moved to. Most of the babies that I've encountered have been very healthy after a whole healthy pregnancy and a physiological birth at home. We live in North America, and we're dealing with women who comparatively have excellent nutrition and hopefully good support systems. And I haven't seen any sick babies.
Yeah,
Babies who are unwell, who
it's
need
pretty
medical
obvious.
attention, should that should happen. So yeah, it's
I
not
mean, I think
really
that's
terribly ambiguous, honestly. It's
yeah.
really not. And again, I was wondering where you're going to go with that, and I thought maybe you were going to ask, what do you do about a baby who's been colonized with GBS? And I mean, perhaps I've encountered many babies who have GBS colonization.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean they're going to become ill, right?
Yeah. Well, and I
So
think
again,
that's
if you have a sick baby, then your baby needs to be, helped. But
supported. Yeah.
it's very, very rare. So what we're doing is we're zapping everyone all across the board. We're treating all of these women and all of these babies with antibiotics that
Mm,
probably statistically is causing far more problems than if we were simply to as is the case in Europe, most European countries, simply um, you know have women have their babies, and we're observant. There are certain situations, possibly, babies who yeah, I should this is important too. There are certain situations where perhaps it might make sense, given the context, to test for GBS, and it's far more effective to test the GBS levels in urine, as opposed to doing the swab test. The swab test is very iffy, as we talked about, but if GBS is present in the urine, then that can indicate a more
severe.
persistent strain, right? So in some cases, a woman who goes into the birth process really, really early, premature baby, that might be a reason to test for GBS. Or a woman whose membranes are open for several days and there might be some sign of infection. That might be a situation in which
But
testing
are you saying to
might make sense.
test the mom's urine in labor or to test the baby once born? Like if a mom
Well,
has open waters
either.
for multiple days, I mean, as far as I know in America, the test takes weeks to turn around. So how do we use
I'm
that?
not sure if that's the case when it comes to the urine test. Honestly, I'm not an expert in this. I really don't know.
Okay.
So I don't want to say anything for sure. But my general point here is that there may be certain circumstances under which the test would make sense. I really I haven't encountered it. In my experience, it's so rare that it hasn't been significant. And I have worked with many, hundreds of women who have never ever tested for it.
Hmm.
And so who knows? They could have been colonized, like colonized. It
Right.
sounds
I
so
just think
aggressive,
it's
right?
so rooted in this, women don't know what these things even are,
Mm,
and then of course we're raised not to trust ourselves or know anything about the birth process or understand how intelligent our physiology of pregnancy and labor is, and all the things that happen in the mother baby dynamic that protect themselves. And so the women don't even usually understand that GBS is in the gut, that it's not
right.
even in
Not
the
like on
vagina.
your vagina. No,
Right.
it's a systemic thing, right? And that's another reason why, I mean, there's all the HIPAA cleanse thing just drives me
Hmm.
crazy. So there's like this protocol where
Right.
it's like an external
Yeah.
cleanse of your vagina. But like how stupid is that? Because it is a gut issue.
Well,
So
the intelligence to that, to my mind, is get the negative.
avoiding the system.
Yeah, if you're in the system, get a negative. If you feel like you
Yeah.
have to get this GBS test for whatever, social
Mhm.
reasons,
Mhm.
get the negative. I mean, that's the
Exactly.
intelligence in my mind that I've seen women do it is, they do the garlic and they do the HIPAA cleanse and all
Yeah.
of this stuff because if they can just get the negative, they won't have to have forced, unnecessary, harmful antibiotics. And oh my God, can we just take a moment to really like feel how significantly damaging it is to begin your mothering and for your child to begin its life with all their gut flora wiped out by antibiotics and to have to
Absolutely.
restart. I mean, oh
Yeah.
my
So many
God.
problems.
And
So
then they
many
get
problems with
thrush
that.
and the
Yeah.
baby's in the NICU
Mhm.
and there's just like the cascade of
Yeah.
harm that happens from the antibiotics, the disruption of it in labor every 4 hours, being tethered
Mhm.
to the tower, and then having the baby in NICU and not having your little one, and then the inevitable pacifiers and formula on top of the antibiotics. I mean, the cascade of
Exactly.
damage is
Yeah.
so worth mentioning
Yeah.
here.
And the for it just it's for women who are planning a free birth. Again, we hear from so many of those women who have this lovely, wonderful idea that they're going to have a great birth at home without any medical intervention, but then they consider seeking out the GBS test because I think again, a lot of women just don't really understand what the implications are, and it's sold as, well, it's not invasive, really. Like yeah, there's something that you're going to put a little stick up your bum hole, but they're not doing any. Like it's not even like the gestational diabetes test where you have to drink the poison, right?
Right.
But as you just pointed out, it does actually kick off this incredible, inevitable snowball effect of interventions.
And
So
so, what Yolanda and I focus on in pregnancy, do this if this feels good, and if not, that's great too, is healthy gut flora, right? Is building a healthy gut. And so, when you are in balance and when you have healthy gut, this becomes something that you don't have to worry about, right? It's
yeah.
actually very simple. If you
Mhm.
have healthy gut that's in balance, because GBS is rooted in imbalance, if you have healthy gut that's balanced, you won't have to worry about this. So, to us, that's the kind of obvious path there if you are having a self-managed life.
Absolutely. And also this is important to note too. The mind and body are inextricably linked. And when we're full of anxiety and stressing about this relationship we have with the authorities out there who are imposing all of these arbitrary craziness things on us, that's going to have an effect on how our internal
Mhm.
physiology is balanced or not. It really does. This is the incredibly fascinating science of epigenetics. Like, we're
Mhm.
creating an energetic context in our bodies that is not conducive to balance
Mhm.
when we're constantly inserting ourselves into this system that is designed to
Yeah.
uh,
Stress you out.
stress you out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pathologize you,
Mhm.
medicalize you. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so a lot more to say on that, but buy our course or buy her book. We're moving on. We're moving on. Now we have ultrasound technology. So this is a very hot topic,
Oh my
but really shouldn't be because there are just facts, and facts sometimes make people really, really triggered.
god. Ooh, wow.
So
Ultrasound, yeah.
ultrasound, yeah. So we're gonna just see what we can do with 15 minutes. Where
Okay.
do you want to start?
Well, ultrasound is, quite frankly, in my opinion, pretty much one of the most insidious
Yeah,
examples of medical industrial coercion in
and
the 20th, 21st
ritualization. Yeah.
century. Yeah. And of course, ultrasound also happens to be one of the most prominently employed
Mhm.
technologies within industrial obstetrics. It's just everywhere. It's, one of the most significant pieces of industrial technological infrastructure within the obstetric system. And none of that's an accident. I really believe that ultrasound is it's a dangerous scam. I know I probably sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's not a conspiracy. It's just
No,
right out there
it's
in the
right there.
open.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Well, so maybe let's
Um,
just say what it is.
so I mean, it's basically the process of bouncing high
Sound.
frequency sound waves off of a mass. So that would be your baby.
Mm.
And, you know, almost every single baby in utero in North America and really globally in most developed, in quotes, parts of the world are subjected to prenatal ultrasound, either in the form of the large ultrasound machines or through the use of the ubiquitous Doppler, which is pulled out at every single prenatal appointment. So,
Mhm.
ultrasound has replaced so many hands-on, interpersonal, soft forms of prenatal care. So we have this collective impression that ultrasound is not only safe, but that it's necessary. It's important for ensuring and confirming the health of our babies. But this just is not so. This is not the case according to the various studies that are done within the obstetric industrial
Mhm.
system by doctors. So just from the get-go, according to medicine's own research, ultrasound does not statistically improve outcomes. It just doesn't. So like that's the foundation of all this, right? It doesn't actually do anything. So even if ultrasound were not harmful, which it is, and even if it did not pose any risks, which it does, it doesn't really do anything statistically. Now, this is a really difficult thing to wrap our minds around because anecdote and confirmation bias are always more impressive to individuals. So, we all know someone who knows someone who
Mm.
had an ultrasound, and that ultrasound picked up on, some problem that the baby had, and that if it weren't for the ultrasound, the family wouldn't have known about the problem and they wouldn't have been able to survive or do X, Y, Z or whatever. And that's fine. Uh, like ultrasound does create a fuzzy black and white picture. It does. But what doctors interpret from that fuzzy black and white picture is highly, highly variable
Mhm.
and very, very specious. So, one of the sort of favorite ultrasound results that is just so important to so many people is placenta previa.
Mm.
And now, again, like real placenta previa, very, very serious and life threatening. Absolutely. So I do not want to downplay that. However, so many women come back from their 20-week anatomy scan.
Or
This is important.
13.
Or a 13-week anatomy scan, reporting that they've been diagnosed with partial placenta previa. Now,
Mhm.
that sounds terrifying, but what does it really mean? Because at 20 weeks gestation, Your baby doesn't even weigh a pound yet, you know? And the placenta adheres to the wall of your uterus. And as our babies grow, our placentas expand, the uterus expands upwards, and the placenta uh, is displaced by that expansion. Um, so it's just not possible to diagnose placenta previa at 20 weeks. And partial placenta previa doesn't really mean anything at all. And often it's like low-lying placenta. Well, who cares at 20 weeks? It doesn't matter. So, the whole thing is just it's a label that's used to describe placentas that are somewhat close to the cervix. So it's such a massive fabrication again of a problem that doesn't exist, and it's designed to frighten women.
Yeah.
And of course, fear causes us all to grasp on to any source of apparent authority or protection. So what happens is that, a sense of dependency on this technology is created. So, well, gosh, if I have partial placenta previa, I guess I better come back for another ultrasound next week just to see if my placenta's moved, and of course, placentas don't move, uteruses grow. But it's just an example of how, to my mind, the primary purpose of ultrasound is not medical. It's psychological,
Yeah.
right? It creates this illusion of being able to see into the womb. And this has the effect of trauma bonding women to the system. And there's such a fascinating parallel, I think, between the rise of ultrasound and the proliferation of screen-based
Yeah.
digital culture that we're all obsessed with. So, um,
How
it's
many
just,
how many women say they didn't feel a connection, or their husband didn't feel a connection with their
yeah,
baby until they saw them on the screen,
yeah.
which, oh my God, oh my
It's
God,
it's a profound, profound.
so painful.
It's terrifying and
So
sad, deeply
so
sad.
you and I say a lot, because we know this to be rooted in science, that ultrasound technology objectively damages healthy tissue.
Right.
Can
So
you
that's
touch on
like
that?
this is the most upsetting and disturbing
Yeah.
aspect of ultrasound. Is that apart from its absence of statistical significance, its failure to improve outcomes, including in the context of placenta previa, which is like trotted out as like, well,
Mhm.
what about placenta previa? It's the fact that ultrasound objectively and factually causes harm to mammalian cells and tissues. So there have been numerous animal studies done that has proven this. And here's a brainwave for everyone. We are mammals.
What?
So, so when I share animal studies that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that yes,
But that wouldn't affect my baby.
ultrasound modifies and damages mammalian flesh, mammalian organs,
Mm.
and this is dismissed as insignificant or irrelevant because we're not mice, right?
Ugh,
But I
so
mean, to my
sad.
mind, really, it sounds like tragic levels of cognitive dissonance and
Oh, yeah.
confirmation bias to me. So, you know, in my book, in our enormous course, The Complete Guide to Freebirth, and in the upcoming mini courses that we're going to be doing on, prenatal care,
All
these
this
sort of,
stuff.
all this stuff, we really do dissect ultrasound and how it works, what it means. And then I think, again, what we also do, and this is really, really important, is to offer alternatives to ultrasound. And I don't mean like alternative technologies that can give you a fuzzy, weird looking black and white, whatever. But I mean that contemporary culture has really created this void for pregnant women. And I think that's at the heart, too, of our obsession, our cultural obsession with ultrasound. If ultrasound, which is the cornerstone of prenatal care, it's kind of like at the heart of what it has now become to feel
Mhm.
safe during pregnancy. If ultrasound isn't what we thought it was, then how do we navigate pregnancy and birth without it? I honestly think it's terrifying for women
Mhm.
to even consider going through a pregnancy without having an ultrasound.
Well,
When I
because it
tell people
represents peace of mind,
represents peace of mind, it
right?
represents safety, it represents just checking. We'll
Being in
just check.
control, yeah,
We're in
knowing what
control.
to
And
expect.
right, and the number of women who I hear who tell me who post this on social media, I had my 20-week anatomy scan and I'm so relieved because my
Yeah,
baby's totally healthy.
yeah,
You have no idea.
you
You
were
have
lied
no
to.
idea. Ultrasound misses so much You were lied to. And the other thing is that ultrasound overdiagnoses so much and
False
fabricates so much.
negative.
There are so many issues that are supposedly found via ultrasound that don't exist or that resolve themselves
Exactly, yeah.
or that create, I mean, it just creates
And
so
like you
many
say in the
problems.
course, it's really easy to tell a woman via ultrasound that their baby's healthy because in the vast majority of babies, they are healthy.
Most babies are healthy.
Most
So it's
babies
really,
are
yeah,
healthy.
it's
So
not a stretch.
right,
It's not
but
a
this
stretch. Yeah.
exactly this peace of mind delusion that it could be given, and that it's a almost a diagnosis given to you by somebody else who doesn't know you, who doesn't know your baby, who's seeing the exact same thing you're seeing on the screen. It looks like that to them too.
Exactly. It's actually such a it's such a brick. It's such a rudimentary sort of like there's no delicacy to it. And that's another thing too, Dopplers are used to hear the baby's heartbeat. Nurses and doctors these days often don't know how to use a fetoscope or a
Right.
Pinard horn. It's outrageous,
Yeah.
actually, because those technologies, and there are technologies as well, albeit analog technologies,
Yeah.
those totally benign, 100% safe analog technologies require skill. They require sensitivity. And what you're hearing in those cases it is actually the sound of your baby's heartbeat.
Right.
Whereas an ultrasound machine or a Doppler, it's a synthesized version of it. So you're not,
It's an
I mean,
echo, right?
it's an echo. There's all sorts of interesting aspects to it. Um, but the
Not to
other thing,
mention the oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, not to
yeah,
mention the studies that link miscarriage to ultrasound, which we're not gonna get into now because we don't have time, but, and that the same ultrasound technology is used to break up tumorous cells, in testicular
absolutely.
cancer and beyond. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
if you're new to this concept and this is the first time that anyone has ever entered this into your brain, that perhaps, there's more to ultrasound than what you've been told, please go listen to our episode on this. We have a whole hour and a half episode from first season called Unpacking Ultrasound Technology, where Yolanda gets way more into the studies and more of the philosophy of this and the science of it. Because there's a lot here.
There's a lot. Yeah, I won't talk too much more, but yes, exactly. I mean, ultrasound correlates with so many issues, and we hear all the time too from people. Well, I had 17 ultrasounds and my kid's fine, and yeah, our kids are fine, but then also our kids aren't fine.
Right.
Right? There
What
are
is
a lot of,
fine?
I mean, what is fine? It's really interesting to look at the history of ultrasound and to also look at, how so many more children in the past, 30 years are being diagnosed with behavioral issues and learning difficulties and all kinds of problems that, again, in these animal studies correlate to ultrasound. And one of the very complicating issues in all of contemporary life is that there are so many, we are always subjected to, as human beings in 2019. So there's such a burden of toxicity that we all absorb all the time. And so I often hear from people, well, just being in the sun is like a huge amount of radiation. Well, yes, just driving your car, we're breathing in pollution. So therefore,
Right.
I'm make the choice in my pregnancies with my babies to reduce that burden as much as possible. And I think ultrasound, to my mind, is, I've been reading about it for 20 years. I just can't. I do think that in our lifetime, ultrasound will blow up as medical, um, a massive medical error,
Yeah.
really.
I mean, it already
It
is to our mind.
it is to our mind.
So
And,
hopefully
more
it'll
and
catch up.
more, interestingly, there are, jurisdictions, there are countries that are
Hmm.
increasingly putting out, warnings against, unnecessary, like, attempting to kind of pull back
Well,
on like
already, I mean, in the
wholesale
States, the
endorsement.
FDA, the CDC, you can
Right.
go on their websites, which of course we've done, and
Mhm.
it outright says on government websites, says this should not be used routinely. This should only be
Definitely.
used in high risk situations, which of
Definitely.
course, what is high risk, blah, blah, blah. But even, even these governing bodies are
Yeah.
saying interesting
Oh,
stuff.
definitely. I
So
mean,
we gotta,
the economics of the issue are
right. It's a
fascinating
whole
too. Like,
nother
follow the
element.
money. It's a
Yeah.
whole other element. Anyway,
So if
it's
this
very
interests
involved.
you, which it should, go listen to our episode and, question this, study this. All of the research that Yolanda has done is all available to the public. So you can make your own conclusions by the same studies. And we cite some of those in the episode, which is free. And then her book and the course, of course, have all of the studies laid out. So yes, very interesting topic. Let's get into our last topic of this episode, which is RH factor slash the rogam shot. Yeah, why don't we first, because I know this is such a confusing topic for people, if you could just give a very, 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 you know, digestible overview of what it is.
Right. So, in a nutshell, RH stands for rhesus factor. And this is a protein on the surface of our red blood cells. So, the majority, 85% actually of the population, does possess this protein. So, they would be said to be RH positive.
Hmm.
15% of the population does not possess this protein, which is why we're called RH negative. So, I'm RH negative. And I first looked into the issue when I was pregnant with my first baby because if a woman with rhesus negative blood becomes pregnant by a man with Rh positive blood, and the mother and baby's blood systems somehow end up intermingling, so mixing, the woman's body may develop antibodies against Rh positive blood, which could then affect the health of a future baby in a variety of ways. So, if, for example, you're pregnant with your first baby, you know you're Rh negative, you know your partner is Rh positive, even if there were to be a mixing of your blood system with your baby's blood system,
Which, how does that
that
happen?
baby,
How does that even happen?
right. So,
Or sorry, you can
that
finish that thought if you want, but make sure you then answer that because I don't understand that.
Well, I will get into that, uh, sensitization is basically what happens when the blood systems mix. So this is the development of antibodies, and the development if you develop antibodies, if you become sensitized, this will prompt your body to remove or destroy what it sees as an invasion of your body. So in the 50s and 60s, a blood product called and this has caused a lot of issues in the past. So there were a lot of babies who died, I think primarily around the turn of the century. So actually, this is a subject that I would love to dig much more into. I have some knowledge, but not as much as I'd like, because the demographics of this are fascinating. So I think it was really around the turn of the century that this 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 the RH factor was really recognized as a problem, and babies were dying. So in the 50s and 60s, a blood product called immune globulin or anti-D was developed. So anti-D goes by several different pharmaceutical names, including rogam and Winro. Those are the main two. And basically, what anti-D does is it stops the it's it 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 stops the woman's body from recognizing the foreign antigen, i.e., her baby's blood, and it protects the next baby from being attacked by her body. And this sounds like a really great thing, and it was in many ways, but there are also risks associated with anti-D, and those risks are rarely, if ever, discussed within the obstetric system. So I think again, this is one of those topics where most doctors probably don't even realize or maybe not even not that they don't care, but it's just not a topic that most obstetricians are really well versed in, like what the risks of anti-D might be, because it was created and it fixed the problem, and it's like it's that's it now. It's just a standard
What we do.
part of
Yeah.
it's just what we do, right? Um, so if you read the package insert on a package of Rogam or Winro, you're going to discover something along the lines of, the pharmaceutical company that manufactured this, blah, 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 stating that this product, that using this product implies an acceptance of the possibility that you might contract a hitherto unknown blood-borne illness. So what anti-D is it's a pooled blood product. So that means that it's made from the blood of many, many different people all mixed together, right? So just off
What?
the bat, right. Yeah, so I
Wait, a
personally
synthetic version or literally
oh,
there?
no, it's literally other people's blood mixed up. Right. Yeah, and I mean, it's
I did
processed,
not
and it's
realize that.
filtered. Yeah, so, you know, just for me personally, I don't love the idea of having other people's blood injected into my body. And furthermore, it contains certain preservatives and adjuvants that, might pose some risks. So, and this can affect the immune system overall, right? Um, so interestingly, and I haven't really dug profoundly into this aspect of it, but my understanding is that the safety of anti-D was tested way back when on 176 males and 2 females. So that's like apparently, from what I've read, that's kind of the main um, uh, research that was done on the safety of anti-D. So not a heck of a lot of real proof that it's totally safe. Um, so there's little evidence that it doesn't cause harm. But there's also little evidence that it really does cause harm too. So it's really one of those things that, it's a tough one because um, Rhesus disease in babies can be very, very serious again. So similarly to the GBS issue, I don't want to downplay the risks of, what can happen to a baby if a mother has become sensitized and her body creates antibodies to try to, eliminate that intrusion, right? What our body reads as an intrusion. Um, so it's important really to understand that the you were asking before about the maternal infant blood systems mixing. So that whole concept is, I think, perhaps again, not what we tend to think that it is. So, currently in North America, in Canada, pregnant women who are Rh negative are generally told that they have to receive an anti-D shot, rogam, Winrow, at 28 weeks gestation. Okay, and so this is again, it's across the board. Every woman in Canada, oh, you're Rh negative, you just get a shot at
Right.
28 weeks. Like, don't
Yeah.
even
Same
think
in the
about it.
States.
It's
Yeah.
fine. Same in the States, right? And the ostensible reason for this is to mitigate the risk that the maternal infant blood systems might mix at some point during the pregnancy, thus causing the mother's body to become sensitized, and that particular baby would be fine, but it's the baby that would be gestated next that would have a problem.
So how do they
Um,
become sensitized?
okay, so that's the thing, right? Um, we don't really understand the risks of NID for the baby. We've already talked about that. But there's no reason for women to believe that their blood systems would mix
Right.
during pregnancy unless they've experienced a major
Right.
traumatic incident involving blunt force trauma to their abdomens. So
Mhm.
during pregnancy, our bodies are designed to conceive and gestate our babies while keeping our blood systems completely separate from the babies. Like, there's no it's
It's as if it was designed to work.
it's as if it were designed to work. So it's not like, oh, gee, you're pregnant, so therefore everything is just kind of a mess
Right.
in there. Like, no, pregnancy is very, very particular. So this kind of goes back to the history of the RH factor, which I find so interesting. Like, how did we get to a point where 15% of the population still is Rh negative? What happened in hundreds and hundreds of years ago that not everyone with Rh negative blood was killed off? Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm totally not a statistician. I have really no math skills at all. But it just doesn't seem right to me that human beings have been able to survive thus far and maintain this, small but existing population of people with Rh negative blood types, right? So, again, I don't want to downplay the risks of sensitization. It's real, it can cause major problems for subsequent babies.
Question.
Mm,
Could you connect the dots for me of how it would potentially harm the subsequent children? What does that actually look like?
right. Okay. So that's actually important as well because there can be a really enormous range of effects. So if a woman, so first of all, if a woman becomes sensitized, that doesn't necessarily mean that her baby will have a problem. Also, whether or not, so it's a very complicated issue. I'm
Yeah.
sort of backpedaling here, but um, your baby will could only possibly have a problem as if your baby has a different blood type from you. Because again, when your body produces antibodies, it's gonna try to reject the different blood, right? So for a lot of women, they've partnered with men who are Rh positive. However, some men are heterozygous, have a heterozygous genotype. And what that means is that their bodies carry an allele for Rh negative as well. So that would depend on their parents. So for example, my husband is Rh positive. However, his mother is Rh negative. So he is heterozygous. Hetero means different. So he actually his blood carries the allele for Rh negative.
Cool.
So there's a possibility that I could be carrying a baby that is also Rh negative, like I am.
Mhm,
And in that case, there's no risk at all. So
mhm.
that's another reason why it makes no sense to inject women with anti-D at 28 weeks, because we don't actually know, for most of those women, many women, we don't know whether or not they might actually be carrying a baby who has the same blood type as they do. And in that
And
case, there's no risk at all.
could we not get the rogam upon experiencing blunt trauma to the abdomen?
Exactly, and that would make a heck of a lot more sense, wouldn't it? And you know, one of the things that makes this so complicated is that there are no guarantees at all.
Right.
So there are no there is a minute chance, a small chance, that there could be some kind of reason why the blood might intermingle in the absence of an accident or a trauma, but it's very, very unlikely. And the other thing that makes this issue so complicated is that every single choice is risk.
Right.
There's risk to this woman's baby, or to her, second, third, subsequent babies, no matter what choice she makes. So I have made the choice not to receive rogam. One of the biggest factors for blood mixing is the birth process. Okay, so during pregnancy, it's unlikely, unless you're in a car accident or there's something terrible happens. It's very unlikely that the blood will mix. But during the birth process, it's much, much more likely that your blood will mix. But I want to go back to what I said earlier about it just not making sense to me that 15% of the population that we sustain this number, that somehow, despite the fact that rogam, Winrow, anti-D was only developed in the 50s and 60s, how did we get this far? How have humans survived thus far? And what I think it is, and really there's no real evidence at all to back this up. Like this is all just, conjecture. And actually, if you really want to learn about this, midwife Sarah Wickham is the person to read. She has written an incredible book about all of this stuff. So a lot of what I'm saying is her work, regurgitated. But my strong suspicion is that the Rh factor emerged as this very, very dangerous issue at around the same time that obstetrics was becoming industrialized. And babies started to die, evidently, and women were having, these large families. And you were asking too before, what is the effect of rhesus disease on babies? So it can be, there's a range. Your first baby will never be affected. But if you are sensitized and it turns out that your body does readily create these antibodies to reject this foreign, invader, then the effects tend to become exacerbated with each baby. So your second baby might just have like some jaundice and otherwise might be okay. Your third baby might have more severe jaundice and maybe anemic.
But this is
And
only after sensitization has
This is
happened,
right. This is in the case of sensitization and antibodies being created.
which is
But
already like crazy rare then for sensitization to happen, right?
it's not crazy rare for sensitization to happen
Oh,
um,
because of the birth process.
when blood mixes. Right. It's
Okay.
not crazy rare. But I think, in my opinion, it's not crazy rare because of industrial birth. I think it's crazy rare for sensitization to happen in the context of undisturbed physiological birth. Because as we discussed, during pregnancy, our our blood systems are designed to remain separate. I think that is the case for birth as well. I think our blood systems are designed to remain separate at birth as well. And I think it's industrial birth practices
Mhm.
that create that high probability of sensitization. And it's things like immediate cord clamping, because what happens when you immediately clamp the cord as soon as the baby is born is that that cord is pulsing, pulsing, pulsing blood, the baby's blood system. You clamp the cord, and there's like a as like when you kink a hose that's on
Mhm.
full blast. There's a pushback,
Mhm.
and you've got blood flowing into the mother's body. So I think
Baby's
that's a
blood
really
flowing into mom's body.
right, exactly. So I think that's one of the main things. Um, and more, I've been talking about this and reading about this for 20 years, and this is my experience too. I have chosen myself not to receive rogam. And I have several babies now who are RH positive. I have some RH negative babies too because my husband is heterozygous, as I mentioned. And for this is very complicated. So for a long time, I thought I was not sensitized, and I don't think I was sensitized. Um, but I've had miscarriages. I had an abortion. Those are also experiences that can cause
Mhm.
some issues in this area.
Mhm.
But I don't think my birth processes caused any sensitization. A few years ago, I was actually tested. So you can actually you can test for antibodies. And apparently I do have antibodies. So apparently I am sensitized. I still went on to have babies without rogam, and my babies have shown no evidence of having any issues. So again, it's very complicated. There is absolutely risk. I would never, ever, ever, like I have to make this very, very clear, suggest that a woman not take rogam
Of
postpartum.
course.
I
Yeah.
personally don't think it's a good idea during pregnancy because I really
Yeah.
don't think there's any reason for it. And again, in Europe, it's not offered as a standard
Well, I don't
um,
even why would a
during
pregnant
pregnancy.
woman get it if you can get
Why?
it postpartum?
Exactly. It just again, it's prophylactic.
Right.
In it's prophylactic no matter what. But in pregnancy, it's like just weirdly unnecessarily prophylactic. And the reason that
For
the
first
28
baby.
week it's for the first baby. Well, yeah, for the first baby, it makes no sense. Well, no, I mean because you're still protecting subsequent babies. That's the rationale anyway. But at 28 weeks, it actually stays in your system for 12 weeks. So that's why it's given at 28 weeks. 'Cause it's supposed to be this kind of blanket protection in the event that, like pregnant women are not constantly throwing themselves downstairs. Like it just doesn't really compute with the experience of pregnancy or the realities of the physiology of pregnancy. Anyway, I feel like I've gone on, and it's such a complex issue. But no, what I wanted to say was that there's this idea that if you are that okay, there's this idea that birth inherently causes sensitization. I don't think that's true. And we know that that's not true because more and more women are choosing not to take it. Lots of women who free birth, who have free pregnancies, and who are RH negative are making the choice to abstain. Okay. And I know many women personally, again, this is all anecdotal, but I know many women personally who do not take rogam, who are RH negative, who do have RH positive partners, and whose babies are fine. So that idea is incorrect. That every RH negative woman is going to become sensitized and have
Mhm.
issues. Then also the idea that sensitization automatically means that your baby's going to be sick
Mhm.
is also not true. Because I know lots of women who are sensitized, whose bodies do register antibodies, like mine,
Yourself included. Yeah.
and who have healthy babies. So what's really going on is that again, there's always risk no matter what, And it's a question of, um, gathering the information that's going to allow you to really make a truly informed choice around all of this, and to really be able to weigh those risks properly. So again, I completely. This is not the same sort of issue as the GBS test. It's not the same sort of issue as a lot of other things because I completely understand why women would choose to receive the rogam postpartum. I totally understand that. But
And
I think
why don't you get it? Like, what's the I guess it kind of just seems like, why not get it?
yeah, I don't know. I guess for me at this point, I'm having my 8th baby and it's sort of like, well, so far so good. Like I just don't I think I'm okay. And that does not make sense. I just want to really like acknowledge that. you know, like it really doesn't make sense and it's not it is purely intuitive. Um but that's really what pre-birth is all about too, right? Is that I am an adult and I'm fine with the risk that I've chosen, and I'm also very aware that receiving this blood product that, is from a whole bunch of strangers' bodies, that involves risk as well,
Yeah.
and I prefer the risk I've chosen. I
Mhm.
think that, the risk is unavoidable, and this is a risk that I can live with. Um, and and I mean, I am having my 8th baby, so
Yeah, because
my kids are healthy, I'm
yeah, a
lucky.
lot of
I'm
women.
just lucky, that's it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And like what you just pointed to, that it is not truthful that if you don't get rogam, you will have stillborns. That's the story out there, is that, and
Right.
that's what women are coming to me saying, that their doctor has said, if we don't give you this shot with this pregnancy, then it is extremely likely that you will kill any subsequent children.
Yeah, no, I mean, and not to dismiss that, yes, stillbirth is one of the possible outcomes of rhesus disease, but again, it's more likely to be a cumulative effect, and I'm not suggesting at all, like, I don't wanna risk that with my kids, but no, let me go back to your question a little bit too, because why don't I take it? I didn't initially. I refused rogam initially because of my theory that physiological birth is protective.
Mhm.
That's my initial reason, and I think that's very valid, I really do, and that's a choice that a lot of women make. But when I then discovered that apparently I have been sensitized, at that point, it's like, well, it doesn't make any difference anyway because, I'm already sensitized, and yet I keep having healthy babies. So in that regard, I am just lucky, I guess, because again, it can be a very serious issue. So I don't want to downplay that. But yeah, no, I mean, there's so much that goes into this, and yeah, I mean, we even go much more in depth in the course and in my upcoming book. But I find that the philosophy behind these ways that we've, um, the just how we navigate these choices in the contemporary world really fascinating too. So that's a lot of what my book is about as well. So I
Mhm.
really try to touch on the facts, interesting research that we may not, that might not be accessible elsewhere. Although again, Sarah Wickham is the person to read for RH stuff, and I reference her a lot in my book. But also, why do we make the choices that we do? What goes into? Yeah, I mean, your question is important. So yeah, and this was not an easy choice for me early on when I was for like I've been having babies for 20 years now. So yeah, I mean, it just feels like all this stuff just it's not really stuff I think about in my own pregnancies anymore. But these are very, very significant decisions, especially when you're starting your mothering journey, and especially for women who know that they want to have several children.
Mhm.
It's not really a big deal if you just want to have one or two kids.
Mhm.
Not as much of a big deal, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. Well, like you said, you go way more into this in your book and in our course. And let's wrap up here with, if you could just tell people how they can find you and how they can follow you on Instagram and keep in touch with you around your upcoming book, because obviously they're going to want to go buy it now.
Yay. I'm excited. Yay. Thank you. This was so much fun. And we're gonna do that other podcast soon, right? About
Oh,
other
and yeah,
stuff?
we're going to do the other one. And then also, we're going to be releasing all these mini courses like you referenced earlier in the
Mm,
podcast about
mhm.
this stuff. So we're hoping it'll be at some point this year where you can just buy a little mini course on RH, or you can buy a little mini course on all four of these things to dive a little deeper in. So stay tuned. And if you aren't already on our mailing list at freebirthsociety.com, obviously you should be. And then what is your Instagram handle for everybody?
Yeah. I'm at Bauhauswife. So that's at BAUHAUSWIFE. And you can join my book mailing list if you go to freebirth.ca. That's my little website. Oh, and I do consults with women all over the world on birth. So if you want a one-on-one, I have a couple of spaces open for new clients.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Cool.
you can email
Thank you
me.
so much. I appreciate your perspective, because as we know, so many women have never heard of alternative perspectives. And I've been doing these Q&As on Instagram lately, and every single time I do it, somebody or many people ask, are there other options besides getting the rogam shot? And it's a big one, because it is like you already know, it is just assumed that women will get the GBS test, they will take the glucose drink, they will get their rogam shot if they're RH negative, they will get their required, quote unquote, ultrasounds, and so here we are saying, well, we didn't do any of those things, and there are other options.
And here we are. Yep.
Awesome. Thank
All
you, babe.
right. Thanks, Emily. Bye.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Free Birth Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.